wondering if your dad was a farmer.
My dad was a farmer. I grew up on a farm in western New York where my parents grew a lot of the same crops we have here. And then I ended up going to college at UNH for horticulture and agronomy. So it's kind of what I've been taught how to do, I should say. And hopefully this works out. It's really the only thing I know how to do.
I actually do need to know the difference between those two. I don't know what agronomy is. I know horticulture, I think I understand. What's the difference between those two?
Horticulture is kind of the plant science, learning how plants grow, what makes them grow, pruning, what pruning effects have on trees and plants. And then the agronomy is more of a soil science. So it's studying soils, what is a soil made of, the organic material in a soil, what makes it work. Why does a plant grow in soil? Does anybody know what soil's made of? What's one component of soil? What's this right here?
Rock.
It's a rock. You see all these little bits of things on the rock?
Yeah.
That some of us might call dirt, little grime. What are those? Are those just little teeny rocks?
Yes.
Yeah, they are. So soil, one of the big components of soil is just tiny fragments of rock and minerals.
Yeah, what's the easiest thing to grow and what's the hardest thing to grow?
Good
What's the
question.
easiest thing to grow? Boy, that is a very good question.
Wow.
Easiest thing to grow? Well, I think this year the peaches were the easiest thing to grow. We had the least headaches with those. But traditionally, apples are the easiest to grow. But this year they gave us some hard times a little bit. Hardest thing to grow every year? Raspberries require a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of manpower to tie up the canes and trim out the ones we don't want, all that kind of stuff. So I should probably say raspberries.
Okay.
Good question.
Good answer.
Why were the apples harder this year?
Well, that's a good question too. Last year we had a really big crop. Sometimes apples go biannual. They set buds for the following year in June the previous year. So when you have a really large crop of apples on the tree in June, some varieties tend not to set a lot of fruit buds for the following year. So we didn't have a big crop coming into this spring because we had too many apples on the tree last year. And then this weird spring warm-up in March, if everybody remembers that week of summer weather we had, I think it was early March, when it was 80 for 3 or 4 days in a row. I think the ground was still frozen underneath. And meanwhile, above ground, the tree was saying, give me some, the buds were asking for moisture out of the ground, out of the root system. But underground, the roots were saying, sorry, the ground's still frozen, I can't send any moisture up to you. So I think some of the fruit buds on the trees desiccated and dried out because they couldn't get enough moisture to them early in the spring when it was so hot and the tree was demanding those resources from the ground. So I think that exasperated the low fruit bud count by killing some of the fruit buds that we did have right then in March. So like the variety like the Macintosh and the Macau and those two varieties, which are big ones for us, they had very small crops this year just because no fruit buds were there in the spring for bloom. Usually we have just a abundant bloom during bloom time on those varieties, and this year it was very sparse. So we knew we weren't going to have a big crop of apples right from bloom time.
Peter and I were here picking strawberries.
Yep.
And we noticed that you put straw or hay around them.
Yep.
And we were wondering, we have a tiny little strawberry bed at home. So we were wondering, is it just so you can pick them easy, or is there just
There's
there
multiple
a chemical
functions
reason?
to that straw. Well, there's lots of reasons. We apply it after Thanksgiving. We put the straw right on top of the plant. So it acts as a blanket to insulate the strawberries from deep cold during the winter. Then in the spring, once the snow melts, we rake the straw off the plants, and then the straw grows up through them. And then the straw acts as kind of a mat, makes it easier for the customers to pick. It covers the rocks and the dirt, keeps the fruit clean, and it acts as a mulch to suppress weeds and that sort of thing. So it really serves many benefits.
Does it prevent the slugs from getting on them too?
It helps keep the fruit and the plants cleaner.
Okay.
The slugs, maybe some, yeah. But when it gets really wet, the slugs come out no matter what.
We had a little problem with those, so we thought, well, maybe the straw.
Right. Well,
We didn't notice any over there.
you know, I hear like a little bowl with some beer in it.
Oh,
The slugs go to that. And then I think they drown in the beer or something. So, you know, on a small scale, that might be an easy way to take care of the slug problem.
yes, thank you.
So, yeah.
Cool.
What would you say is the biggest pest? One of our questions on our scavenger hunt is about pest control,
Pest control. Wow.
evidence of pest control. So what's your
Well.
biggest enemy for the fruits?
Well, every year it's different, it seems like. A couple years ago, it was the deer. So we put up a much better fence to manage the deer pest. You know, a pest doesn't have to be an insect or a fungi. It can be deer. And to boot, the deer fence keeps all our neighbors honest, too. So sometimes, you know, good fences make good neighbors, right? And I think that's true in this business, too. So those are two examples of pests. But this year we have a new invasive species. I don't know, some of you might have heard about the spotted winged Drosophila. It's basically a fruit fly, which typically a fruit fly searches after rotting fruit. And you'll notice on your counter in the kitchen, the fruit flies swarm around the overripe tomatoes and whatever. But this fruit fly has adapted, and the female has a saw on her ovipositor, which is her egg-laying device. So she can actually cut a hole in the skin of a sound ripening fruit. So this fruit fly goes after the fruit when it's still on the tree or bush and it's ripening. So that's thrown us some curveballs this year. We learned a lot about how to manage it, and that's going to be something we're going to have to learn how to live with in the future. Is this bug? So, anyways, that was kind of predominated in my mind this year with the pest issue because it was new. It was right there, and it was an issue. So. But other than that, you know, apple scab every year, the fungus early in the spring, May and June are heavy apple scab months where we need to keep a fungicide on the tree to protect that young green tissue from the scab fungus from proliferating. And there's some other insect pests during the year that we have to worry about as well. But,
Madison has a question.
yes.
How many people does it take to help this?
Well, that's a good question. During the season, starting in probably May 1st, we bring on about 2 helpers to help prune the peaches, prune the raspberries, do some of the mowing. Then June 1st, we have to start thinning the peaches. So then we'll have a crew of 3 to 4 people out in the peach trees hand thinning peaches off the tree. Because the peach tree was so prolific with the amount of peaches that they have on them, that in order to have a nice big peach at harvest time, we have to hand thin off the ones we don't want. So it takes about 1 man-hour per tree to go through and hand thin a tree. And so we have about 4 or 5 people doing that in June. And then once the farm opens for strawberries, then we usually have a person or 2 in here running the register, helping customers find what they're looking for. So, to answer your question, 3 to 5 people starting May 1st through the end of apple harvest every day. And then in the winter, it's just me and my wife. For about 3 months every winter, it's down just to 1.5 person show. Yeah.
I was wondering if the horses are around.
The horses have gone home for the winter. They are on loan to us from Tiny Tails Farm in Gilmington Ironworks. My daughter befriended a nice lady who has about 10 of them, and she loans us 2 every summer. They'll be back next summer, though, most likely.
At first there's usually cows.
There are usually cows, but that's a dairy farm. We're not a dairy farm, are we? Yeah. There's a dairy farm down the road. You'll probably see cows when you drive home today. If you look to your left, there's a big dairy farm there, where all the tall corn is growing. Yeah.
I want to know about the peacock too. With the
Peacock is an interesting creature. On that note, if anybody knows of a peahen for sale, or that anybody wants to get rid of, I'm in the market for a peahen. Because the peacock is very lonely. The hens in there with them aren't doing the trick. The peacock arrived here at Buternut Farm about 3 years ago. The neighbor up the road, Ruth Scruton, she has a traveling barnyard business. She has too many peacocks. And this was one of the younger ones. The older males were running it off. So she came by one day and asked me if we wanted a peacock. The peacock was in the back of her Subaru. I said, sure. What does it eat? She said, the same thing as the chickens. I said, will it live with the chickens? She said, sure. So she grabbed the peacock and threw it in with the chickens, and that was 3 years ago. And it's been there ever since. It's great. You know, every year it grows new feathers and loses its feathers sometime in July. So there's usually a 2 or 3 week period where every little kid here is running around with a peacock feather. But in the spring, it's really it's kind of neat to have because it does its fanning, its mating dance, and its mating call and all that. And it's neat and pretty to see. I think he's starting to grow his feathers now again for next spring already.
Cool.
That's the story behind the peacock. Yes.
How much do the animals eat a day?
Well, the sheep go through, if they like the hay, the sheep are very finicky about the hay they're eating. This hay they don't like, so they don't go through very much. But if they like the hay, they'll go through about 1/4 of a bale a day, I'd say. And the chickens, I just give them a little scooper full of chicken scratch and some layer mash every day. Not much. The chickens are pretty easy. They're inexpensive to have. The sheep are a little more expensive. The horses, they like the hay. They went through a lot of hay. They went through about 1/2 bale a day. Lots of good questions so far.
Yes, that's true.
Very good.
Do you use the sheep for anything else besides attraction?
No, they actually belong to Ruth Scruton, the same lady who brought by the peacock. So once apple season's over, she'll come and grab them for the winter. And then next spring, she'll bring a new batch, a new 2 babies and a mommy. You know, she usually always brings. So the little ones in there, they're not so little anymore, but they were very small when they first arrived in the spring for strawberry season. And then they grow, you know, they grow throughout the year.
My turn to Giff.
All right. At that.
We'd like to say thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you for your time.
Well, thanks
Great.
for coming by. Have a good scavenger hunt. If there's any more questions, feel free to ask.
Awesome.